lucky to have Tobias Ellwood with us this morning. It's good to see you. Very serendipitous because somebody who you'll know well, General Sir Patrick Saunders, I'm not sure if you served with him, but certainly you have served. You did. So he's suggesting, reading between the lines in the Telegraph today, that if we go to war with Russia, we could find that our youth may have to be conscripted. That's a bit alarming.
Yes. Head of the British Army, one of the most cerebral thinkers that we've got, a strategist. We need to listen and listen carefully. We've been too complacent. I think I've said this many times with you. What's coming over the horizon should shock us. It should worry us, and we are not prepared. We've had a couple of decades, 3 decades or so since the Cold War. Life has gone well. It's now going to get more difficult as authoritarian states exploit our timidity, our perhaps reluctance to really put fires out. And the best example of that is a democracy on the corner of Eastern Europe that, in its 3rd year, is now in conflict, and we've not resolved that. So Patrick Saunders is saying, prepare for what's coming over the horizon. There is a 1939 feel to the world right now. These authoritarian states are rearming. There's a risk averseness about the West in wanting to deal with that. And institutions, global institutions such as the United Nations, aren't able to hold these errant nations to account. In fact, the UN, I'd go further, is reaching its League of Nations moment unless it's reformed. So that's where the world is heading. We need to wake up to that. There's a mindset now of this era of insecurity that we're heading towards, but we're still on a peacetime defence budget of just 2%. That does need to change. And the Red Sea is a great example that if you don't step forward, if you're not robust in dealing with those that are testing the envelope, it will be our weakness will be exploited, and it will affect our economy.
OK, so let's unpick some of that, should we? We don't have enough members in the army. Is that what you're saying?
Very much so. The army is now overstretched. It's down to 70,000 or so. Different reasons for that. Pay is now an issue. Accommodation is improving, but remains an issue as well. You're obviously competing salary-wise with the civvy street too, so that needs to be looked at. I know Grant Shapps recognises this, recognises the concerns here. There's also the state of our reserves as well. They're the ones that will be pulled in if we need to mobilise too. But ultimately, as I say, it's a big mindset of Britain recognising just how dangerous our world is going. What is our role to step forward, as we've done in the past, to defend what's important to us?
So you're suggesting the defence budget should be up at 5% as it was during the Cold War?
To jump to 5%, they wouldn't even know what to do with that money straight away. It takes time to procure the ships, the planes, the tanks, and so forth. What we do need to do is quickly move to 2.5% and then eventually 3%. In the Cold War, it was about 4%. But ultimately, we have a Navy which is half the size of what it should be, likewise with the Army as well. And the RAF, in the Cold War, we had 36 fast jet squadrons. We're down to about 6 today. And that's just an illustration of just how small our armed forces are. Extremely professional. The equipment is good. It's just not enough to deal with all the threats that we're dealing with. Our world is no longer at peace. We're moving to a world at war. Britain absolutely has a role to play, but we need to upgrade our defence posture.
But do shock tactics like those that I propose General Saunders is going to use during his speech at 10:15 today, do those actually work?
Well, as I say, I think it's going to take repeating this message again and again and again. And there may be an acute event that will wake everybody up to say, my goodness, yes, there is absolutely a threat there. Because, of course, what sits behind Russia is China. There's a dangerous alliance there. Our world could easily splinter into 2 spheres of competing influence. The West, which is shrinking, and authoritarian states under China pursuing and exploiting a very different interpretation of our global order. And then many countries across the global south, for example, looking to see which way the world is going to go.
And looking at what Iran is doing via the Houthis in the Red Sea at the moment.
Great example of, and then what sits behind Iran, of course, is Russia. What sits behind the Houthis, Hamas and Hezbollah is Iran. And again, for a decade, we've allowed Iran to advance its influence across the region, destabilising, not least in Yemen as well. I'm really pleased that we are continuing our work in the Red Sea to protect those international shipping lanes. If we did nothing, as some may be arguing, that would have a knock-on consequence to our economy, but it would also give the signal, not just to Iran, but to other competitors, to take advantage of our weakness.
What should we be doing about Gaza?
about Gaza, that's a tough question there. The first thing you need to do is to further the idea that we can get to a ceasefire. That will require a third party to sit between both the Gazans and indeed Israel too. But ultimately, there's a humanitarian issue in Gaza itself. Israel needs to recognise that only a two-state solution is where the world wants to go, where it needs to go as well. There needs to be a summit, in my view, of all the interested parties, the stakeholders, including the Arab nations whose support is critical. That could be held at Chequers or at Camp David. That's what needs to happen as soon as possible, rather than this drifting into a frozen conflict, as it seems to be at the moment.
I'm surprised you went with the two-state solution comment. It's been described by many as a slogan for now, given the state of Gaza.
It's been described as a slogan because we've had the Madrid talks, the Camp David talks, we've had the Oslo Accords and so forth, all talking about this two-state solution for decades and decades and decades, and it's never materialised. Many reasons for that, not least Hamas and what it's done to Israel over the years in sending missiles across, poor governance in the West Bank as well, but also, I think, a reluctance, if we're really honest, of Israel wanting to pursue this as well. What we can't see is this cycle of violence continue again, where things calm down between Gaza and Israel for another decade or so, and then it all then ratchets up again. We need to determine a long-term solution for this. That requires the Western support. It requires the Americans leaning in. It requires the Arab community, particularly those who signed the Abrahamic Accords, to do their part in supporting the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza.
Let me ask you, let's pivot, given that you're a senior Conservative MP, you were a former Defence Minister, you were former head of the Defence Committee. I'm sure you'll know Simon Clarke very well. He's also writing in The Telegraph. They're doing very well today, aren't they, with all their exclusives. He's a former ally of Rishi Sunak. He's cut him to the bone, saying that he's uninspiring. He used to be an asset and now he's an anchor. What are you hearing in the tea rooms?
Where do I start with this? There's a lot of respect for Simon's thought, his contribution to the direction of the party, particularly in the economic space, but there's shock, disappointment in what he's doing. We're just moving in to calmer waters thanks to the leadership of Rishi Sunak. It's been a bumpy couple of years, and now he is doing this, throwing his teddies in the corner because his choice of Prime Minister is no longer in number 10.
Yeah.
No longer in number 10. It's not only dangerous, reckless, selfish, it's also defeatist, because what the electorate want to see, they want to see leadership. They want to see a good manifesto with policies in it, but they also want to see unity. Unity, unity, unity. That is what will win a general election. And to do this months away from the next general election is absolutely shocking. And more colleagues are openly distancing themselves from Simon Clarke. I'm sure there may be others behind Simon that now are rolling behind him.
I was going to ask, how representative is he?
I do urge him and others to think really carefully about what they're doing, because it really is damaging the prospects, not only of any chance of us winning, and don't forget, 25% of the electorate still don't know which way they might vote at the next election, but it's also...
But how representative is he?
How representative is it? There will always be a caucus. There is in Labour as well that probably want to go against Keir Starmer. But what are they doing right now? They're keeping quiet. And Simon Clarke should keep quiet, along with his colleagues too. Let us do our best to try and win the next general election. Don't be a roadblock to prevent that happening.
OK, it's always great to see you, Tobias Ellwood. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.